Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I'm your host, Josh Zorhoff, and I am a teaching pastor and a therapist in the West Michigan area. And this podcast is brought to you by the Fearless family of churches and my good friends at Care Portal. Did you know that 97% of the requests in West Michigan put into Care Portal over the last couple of months have been fully taken care of by individuals who have gone online, seen the need, and made it? If you want to know more about Care Portal and how they serve the children and families in the area of West Michigan and beyond, you can learn more in the podcast notes about Care Portal. And again, we'll have Alex Vogelzang on to talk a little bit later in the podcast season to share more about Care Portal and other things that are meaningful in terms of mental health. We're going to continue on with a conversation about stress responses and how we navigate emotional realities in our lives and in our workplaces, in our families, and in our homes. And I want to talk today about conflict. We're going to go through a two-part conversation. Part one, how conflict works, and part two, some simple strategies that we can employ at home to navigate conflict and to even resolve conflict with the people that we're in relationships with. Conflict is inevitable. And as we talk about how conflict works, I want to start by saying that conflict isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes we have to go through conflict. In fact, if you're in a relationship with someone who is different than you, which most of us are, we are going to have conflict. When you have an opinion and someone else has an opinion, or you have a certain way of doing things, or someone else has a certain way of doing things, there's going to be a collision of sorts. Have you ever wondered, why do I have such frustration with my spouse over certain elements in the home? Maybe that's the way that we deal with chores, or the way that we talk about the kids, or the way that we handle parenting, or the way that we work through finances. Typically, a lot of those things come from our home of origin. We learn how to deal with money, how to talk about sex, how to raise children, how to work within the home, whether that's roles within the home or what have you. We learn those things by observing our parents do them or our parents not do them. And so our home of origin comes into play a lot. And so when it comes to problems at home, or comes to discussions that you have with your spouse that lead to conflict, there's a lot that comes with that. The same is true about work. You may have a certain way of doing things, and another person may have a certain way of doing things. And all of a sudden you find yourself in this tension or this high conflict. And here's a couple of things to note straight away about how conflict works. First of all, conflict builds over time, and it does not resolve itself. It will not go away if you just sweep it under the rug. You may have heard the statement, "Time heals all wounds," and that statement is woefully untrue. If you give something time and it is rooted in conflict, that conflict will grow and it will carry over to the next time you have a problem. A few years ago, during the pandemic, my wife and I decided that we were going to become gardeners. Like most people, we thought it would be a really good idea to buy a bunch of plants and see if we could keep them alive while we were sheltered in place and while we were working at home. And we did a great job. In fact, those plants stayed alive for a really long time, up until August hit, and then my wife had to go back to school and get ready for the classroom, and I had to get back to work, and working not remotely, but working in person. And those plants went from thriving to dead in a matter of weeks because we couldn't water them anymore. And because I didn't want to deal with it, I just let those plants sit there for a number of weeks until we got to a mid-October. And I knew the snow was going to come and I needed to winterize the house. And so I took those plants and I started chopping them down and throwing them away and emptying them out. And I was not wearing gloves. That was a critical error on my part. I thought I would be okay just handling the plants as they were, but there were a couple of plants that were dried, withered, and gnarly looking. And they also had these very small thorns that had grown on the side. And I grabbed onto one and I got a small thorn in my finger. It was my pinky finger and it hurt, but it wasn't that bad. And so I figured, you know what? It'll come out on its own. It'll be fine. I don't need to worry about it. The body will take care of itself. If I just leave it alone, it'll push it out and it'll be all right. And that could not have been further from the truth. Over the matter of the next few days, my finger got more and more sore. It started to get red. It started to get hot to the touch. For those of you who are in the medical field, I started to get these like red lines moving down my finger, and that's not a good sign if you do in fact have something foreign in your body. And on top of it, I do a lot of typing. I do a lot of writing for my job, and I use the keyboard a lot, and I use my pinky for the shift key. And that shift button started to hurt a whole lot. And I never realized how much I used the shift key until my finger was infected. And I thought, this is not good. I got to do something about this. So because I'm a responsible human being, I did not go to the doctor. I went home and I took a lighter and I heated up a knife. And then I made sure it was all clean. And then I just went into my finger and I started digging through that infected part of my finger to see if I could, in fact, get whatever was in there out. I know some of you are thinking, Josh, they go to hospitals for that. I don't like hospitals, so I figured I would take care of it myself. And it was pretty nasty. There was like stuff coming out of it and it was gross. And finally, I was able to get out this small, what seemed to be microscopic in some ways, thorn. And after a while, my body started to heal and my finger was okay. And now I don't have any sensitivity there. I'm good. But I talked to a friend of mine who's a nurse, and she told me, Josh, you got really lucky. You got really lucky. That could have been a staph infection. That could have gone septic. You could have lost your finger. Like, Josh, that was not a good idea. You can't let those things sit. And here's what I want to tell you. Conflict works the same way. We think the small things that irritate us will just go away if we leave them be. And they will just go away over time. But they don't. And they can be catastrophic to our relationships. On the flip side, if we handle conflict well, it can be very healing for our relationships and it can strengthen our relationships. But here's not only this problem of conflict, like building over time and getting worse over time if unaddressed, conflict also carries over. So if you get into an argument with someone at work about them not like taking care of their junk on their desk. Like you like things clean, they don't, you share a space, you get into an argument with them about the fact that they are not as clean as you are, and you say something and it builds a little hostility and you don't like the tension, so you just let that go. The next time you have conflict, the next time you are dealing with something specific to this person, and it doesn't have to be about their cleanliness. Maybe it just has to do with something that they forgot to do on the job. You're going to carry that conflict over. So if your previous argument left you at like a 2 in a 1 out of 10, the next time you guys have a fight, or the next time you guys have conflict, or the next time you have a discussion, where are you going to start off at? You're not going to start off at a 1. You're probably going to start off at a 2, and you might even, given the frustration, start off at a 3. And this is what happens in interpersonal work relationships. This is what happens in marriages. This is what happens in families. You don't address the conflict, and then it carries over to the next time. And then no matter what the discussion is about, you're going to pick up where you left off, and it's going to build, and it's going to build, and it's going to build. It is going to worsen over time. This is why couples can go from small little arguments into knockdown, drag out blow-ups, where the two of you are saying things that you never thought you would say to the other person. This is why work relationships can get so tense, because we fail to deal with the conflict when it arises. And as conflict occurs, here's why things get so tricky. Remember, in the last couple of episodes, we talked about the stress responses and how when we are in stress, the blood flow from the front of our brain moves to the back of our brain. When we're in conflict, those stress responses get triggered. So if you are in conflict and someone says something to you that either engages you in a negative way, or it brings you to a space where you feel threatened, or you feel like you need to defend yourself, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fold thing happens. And if you're a fighter and you're in conflict, what's going to happen? You're going to get loud. And you're going to get big, and your gestures are going to get more enhanced, and your volume is going to go up, and you're going to get more intense. And if you are a fighter, you're going to what? You're going to resort to falling back. You're going to get quiet. You're going to try to walk away. You're going to do anything you can to escape that situation. If you fawn, what are you going to do? You're going to try to make the other person happy just so you can appease that stress response that you have. If you're a finder, you're going to look for somebody else to be the outlet for your anger. Maybe not the person you're talking to, but you're going to go home. You're going to say something to your kids. You're going to say something to your spouse, but you're going to find someone to manage that stress for you. If you are, in fact, someone who freezes, you are just going to shut down. And if the conflict gets too high, you might just fold altogether and you're just done for the day. Those stress responses kick in. And when they kick in, it's going to cause a cycle of a stress response with the other person or the other people that you are in conflict with. So you're going to say something, and I don't know if you've ever had this. I know I have, where you say something in anger or in conflict, in a stress response, and the other person is then hurt by what you have to say. And because they are hurt, they are then triggered, and their stress response kicks in. So if I'm a fight person and I'm talking to a flight person, I'm going to say something, they're going to withdraw. They might even try to walk away from me, and that's going to make me more frustrated. And so then I'm going to get louder, and they're going to feel the need to retreat all the more. And we're going to get into what is considered to be a toxic cycle of conflict. A few years ago, I talked with some individuals who were in a toxic and reactionary conflict cycle. The man, they were married. The man grew up in a family that was very verbal in their conflict. They got loud, their gestures got big. He grew up in a family of fighters. Their stress response was fight. And they got loud, and they used big words, and sometimes they used intense language, and sometimes their gestures were really big, and it looked from the outside like they were pretty angry with each other while they were discussing their conflict. Well, his wife, believe it or not, did not grow up in a high conflict, high verbal conflict family. When they were in conflict, they got quiet. Yes, they grew up in a flight response family. And this was a classic come here, come here, come here, get away, get away, get away reality for them. When he got loud, when he got big, when he got intense, she shut down. She would do anything she could to get away. And that just made him more frustrated. And over the course of a few months, and this was early on in their marriage, whenever they would get into conflict situations, things would get really intense. He would get really angry. She would feel really hurt. Then, after they took some time away from each other, because they never really resolved the issue, she would then find ways to subtly get back at him, whether it was through passive aggressive statements or withholding affection and withholding other really critical elements of their relationship, like their sexual intimacy. And then he would then retaliate in saying negative comments, making her feel ashamed, and just around and around and around and around and around and around they went. And it turned into this really toxic cycle. And here's what I want to say about that. We are all capable of that kind of toxic conversation. If we are not aware of how conflict works, we can get stuck in those toxic cycles. You're going to say something, they're going to feel attacked, they're going to say something, you're going to feel attacked, and around and around and around we go. And that's why conflict can be so devastating to our relationships. I had a seminary professor years ago. His name was Dr. Gary Meters. And if you know me and you went to Grand Rapids Theological Seminary, maybe you had Dr. Gary Meters too. He was awesome. He said a lot of really cool and interesting things, but one thing that he said to me, and he said to the class, and this is years ago, and I'll never forget it. He said, words are cheap, but you can't buy them back. Words are cheap, but you can't buy them back. The things that we say in anger, the things that we say in stress, the things that we say when triggered, if left unchecked, specifically when we're in conflict, they are easy to say. They cost us nothing on the front end to say it. But boy, the expense on the back end is too high to buy back. What we say in anger, we have to be so careful with. And as you're listening to this, I'll bet you could probably imagine at least 2 or 3 scenarios in the last year where you've said something or done something in that stressful moment of conflict that you regret and you wish you could take back and you can. And here's the problem. People remember. People remember what we say in those high conflict and anger moments far more than we wish they would. I can remember what people said to me in anger. I still remember what my dad said to me in anger when I was a kid. I remember what my mom said to me in anger when I was a kid. Maybe you do too. I remember what my teachers said to me in anger. I remember what my bosses said to me in anger. I remember what my wife says to me in anger. And I wish I could forget it, but I can't. And so we just need to be really careful. I know that I have said things in anger and in stress in those high conflict moments to my wife, my son, my friends, my family, my coworkers. I've hurt people with my words, and I can't take that back. Words are cheap, but you can't buy them back. And so that's how conflict works. Conflict builds over time. It gets worse over time if it's unaddressed. It changes our brain from our thinking brain to our doing brain, our reactive brain. It triggers those stress responses. It can catch us in a cycle of toxic conversation. And then we say things that we wish we could take back and we can't. And so as you process through conflict, I just want to encourage you, think through the conflict cycles that you have. Are you in a toxic conflict cycle, or are you in a place where the conflict isn't being resolved? Don't worry. This is part 1. We're going to do part 2 in our next podcast episode, where we walk through some helpful ways that you can navigate the conflict in your life. But for now, consider how conflict works for you. What is your stress response? What are your go-to phrases? What are some of the things that put you in that conflict cycle? And maybe you've said things in anger to another person, maybe a spouse or a friend or a coworker, and you need to call them and you need to apologize. You need to ask for their forgiveness, because you don't want to be a person who devastates your relationships because you're not handling your stress well, or you're not handling your conflict well. Don't let it fester. It will get worse. But it can also get better. And we're going to talk about that in our next episode. If this has been helpful for you, let us know. Follow us on Spotify. Give us a couple likes on iTunes. Give us some stars. Give us some love. We'd appreciate that. And if you'd like for us to come into your workspace, or you're putting on an event and you'd like for someone to come in and talk about conflict or communication, or you want to talk about the stress responses, we would love to do that. Reach out to us at chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org, or go to our website, fearlesschaplaincy.org. We'd love to connect with you. That's all we have for this time. We'll talk with you later.